Well, I'm Fernanda Simón. My name is Fernanda Simón. I'm associate professor at the University of Navarra in Spain, and I teach constitutional law. And one of my core interests, research interests, is precisely religious freedom. So I'm deeply sympathetic to the Laboratory of Religious Freedom, and I'm deeply thankful for being here, for having been invited to this wonderful conference. Yes. Well, first, rights discourse, it's we could say the official moral discourse in our society. So that's the reason why I say that everybody has to legitimize their moral discourse on the basis of human rights, because it's the officially established moral discourse of society and the officially established discourse of justice. However, we all have to use that discourse. We all have to use that labels, that categories of right, free speech, religious freedom, etc. Well, all the freedoms of the different catalogs of freedoms, of liberties, of civil liberties. But however, we don't agree on their meaning. That's the problem, on their scope and their content. And that poses a lot of challenges. I think the reason of this phenomenon is the loss of classical natural law tradition, we could say, the breakdown of the classical natural law tradition of the idea that there is a logos behind that categories, behind rights. Without that logos, without that, what the Chinese call the Tao or the Dharma in the Hindu tradition, or, well, in several traditions all over the world, there are different ways of calling it, but without an openness to a moral truth behind that and to a moral understanding of what means to be, what a fulfilled life means, without that common understanding, the conflict is unavoidable. We are not able to solve conflicts of rights. We are not able to solve, mainly the conflicts of rights, but we are not able to give meaning in general to the different rights. We don't know what conducts are really worthy of protection by a human right. Or we have different understanding on that. And sometimes it's even crazy understandings of what conducts or behaviors should be protected by rights. So that's why I mean that there is a chaos. There is somehow like a Babelic confusion on the meaning of rights. It is Babelic because there is a striking paradox of the fact that we try to create a universal language, we try to live by the same categories, but the universal language is only apparent because the meaning conveyed by those categories is by no means universal and by no means peacefully shared. So that's the conflict about which I was speaking in my book. Well, religious freedom is extremely important for our societies. I think it's not very difficult to justify. Religion is one basic good for the human being. The harmony with the transcendent source of life, of existence in general. The harmony with that transcendent source. And with the ultimate questions of our life, with our telos, with the place where we are going to, with our destiny beyond this life. All that questions are the most important questions that a person has to face. So the lack of freedom in honestly facing that questions is really troublesome, and it may be a deep oppression it is a very deep oppression for a human being not to be able to honestly face that questions. So religious freedom in that sense is extremely important. Well, I think that in the West, the dangers are different. Generally speaking, we are not an exception from other countries of the West, of the Western, what we call the Western civilization. We are not an exception regarding the dangers that we are facing. The dangers or the perils, the threats that we are facing in Spain are not very different from those that we are facing in other Western countries. And basically, the dangers are coming, or the threats are coming, I think mainly, not only of course, but the most concerning threat in terms of the way it is spread in our society is the threat of the transition from what I called a relativistic, deconstructive liberalism to a relativistic, authoritarian liberalism that intends to impose a liberal orthodoxy, we could speak, on everybody in the name of tolerance sometimes, in the name of diversity, and that imposes serious burdens on religious freedom for the people. For example, more and more people are not free to defend the traditional vision of marriage in the West, or the traditional vision of marriage. On issues relating the right to life, there is also a threat on religious freedom. I think that on gender ideology, for example, on the relationship between the sexes, the complementarity of man and woman, on all that issues, we are facing an ideological imposition, an ideological threat that endangers religious freedom in our world, in our Western countries. Of course, Spain is not an exception in that sense. Yeah, I'll comment on just one question, or one or two questions. There is a striking paradox between, and that was the topic of my lecture actually here, there is a striking paradox between a claim of free speech that considers itself, that dispenses itself with a duty of respect to religious people, to the honor of religious people, and tends to include under the umbrella of free speech, blasphemy, religious insult. There's a striking paradox between that and what we can call the cancel culture. We see it in the universities in the United States, and also in Spain we have many examples. The cancel culture, a prohibition, a ban on talking, on the talk of, on the speech, on questions, on issues contradicting or challenging the liberal orthodoxy, as I have called it before, the liberal authoritarianism. So on the one side, we are censoring some ideologies, we are prohibiting, we are banning some discourse, and at the same time, on the other hand, we are legitimizing, in my countries, we are legitimizing blasphemy and religious insults with something that deeply hurts the honor of the offended. In Spain, there are even cases in which that religious offense has been directly sponsored by the government through public exhibitions, through public funds, or, even some of the parties in our government have proposed, some of the members of parliament and at least one of the parties in the coalition of government in my country has proposed to suppress the crime of religious offense, which is really, it's really an open attack. So that is concerning in my view. Yes, I think so. I think so because, as I have said, there is a transition between a relativistic, deconstructive liberalism to an authoritarian liberalism, relativistic to liberalism. So the slogan some years ago to deconstruct the traditional sources of authority, of moral authority, the slogan was, "Who cares? Who cares?" Nowadays, the slogan to impose certain ideologies that not long ago were defended as a right to be alternative, to even as a right to do wrong. Now that wrong is defended, is imposed sometimes as an obligatory, as a mandatory ideology, and even the cases of blasphemy are increasing now. So it is defended as free speech. I think there is something evil in the whole thing. So But unfortunately, I think the increase is something blatant, is patent. I think this is the most difficult question for me, because this is the most difficult question because I'm not acquainted with the whole youth in my country. So, and in general, in the atmosphere in which I work, is relatively, they have relatively high moral standards of concern for poor people, for people who suffer, also for people who suffer these so-called religious oppression or secular oppression, maybe better to call it, no? Probably some of them are their victims, so it's normal that they are concerned, but they are also concerned with poor people, and there is a lot of solidarity in the university in which I work. Is something amazing, and it's really beautiful. We have an NGO that is very proactive, very, very proactive, and proactive with the poor people in our own community, in my region. So they don't have to go very far to do social work, to help the others, and to care for human rights of people in my country. Even in my region and in my town. So that's really beautiful. But you are not asking me for that. You're asking me for the youth in my country, and that's something I'm not sure. In general, I tend to be optimistic of the youth always, because the youth always conveys a promise. Young people, that has been said by Hannah Arendt, no, on birth, no. Newborn is always a promise, and we can say something similar or analogous of young people in general. So I want to be optimistic, and I see that there are noble ideals in the youth, thank God. But my concern, and this makes me also nuanced in my optimism, is that there's a huge lack of formation, of intellectual formation, even moral formation. Young people lack, unfortunately, moral references. That's my impression. So when you lack moral references, it's very common, or it's very easy that your noble ideals of the youth, they don't get the right channel. So they are not rightly channeled, or they become just vague aspirations that in the end of the day they turn into nothing in the long run, because one thing is having noble aspirations and another thing is fighting for the noble aspirations in life. That requires a lot of sacrifice, and I don't see that there is a disposition to that sacrifice in our societies, a huge disposition, a readiness to sacrifice. So that makes me somewhat cautious for the noble concerns of youth. At the same time, as I say, youth always has noble concerns. That's always you can find in the youth noble concerns. How that concerns are challenged, that's more nuanced, because I don't see moral sources of authority and of education to. Sometimes I don't see it clear, but we have to have hope, of course. So great. I would say a nuanced optimism or a nuanced pessimism. So I'm in between. Yeah, the paradoxes. The scope of my lecture was to to explain the paradox of free speech in our society, to reflect upon the causes of that paradox, which was mainly the vacuum created for anti-authoritarian, from liberal anti-authoritarianism. Liberal deconstructive anti-authoritarianism created a vacuum of moral authority, but that vacuum should be fulfilled, ultimately has to be fulfilled, and it has been fulfilled by what we call political correctness. So what liberal relativistic anti-authoritarianism especially impulsed or fostered in the 60s, in the sexual revolution in 1968, with its motto, interdit d'interdire. It is prohibited to prohibit, or it is banned to ban. That kind of liberal anti-authoritarianism tried or attempted to to undermine the sources of moral authority. Trying to undermine authority as such, but that's a utopian goal, which it is impossible to achieve. Ultimately, what it really achieved is to undermine the traditional sources of moral authority. So the vacuum came to be fulfilled by another kind of sources, and that's political correctness. The phenomenon of political correctness substitutes the church, the family, as a moral instance of authority. That political correctness has been the source of authority, or has been, since then, I could say, or at least since then. That's a phenomenon that is born in the 60s, I think, or at least it is deeply enhanced in that years. There is technologies, the rise of technologies in the last 20 years has operated as a catalysator of these political correctness, has made it more fluid, more liquid. And in our times, the situation is that moral authority is extremely fluid, extremely diffuse. But there exists, and that's more than moral authority, I'll call it political correctness directly. That political correctness imposes a straitjacket on free speech in our days. So that's the situation, and there is a striking paradox between that. That's the source of the paradox, I say. That has created this paradox in which, on the one hand, we don't tolerate certain ideologies or certain religious speeches or certain ideologies. In the name of a liberal orthodoxy, certain ideologies are not tolerated. And on the other hand, we are tolerating blasphemy, we are tolerating that discourse. So on the one hand, I have tried to explain the origins of the paradox, which is, in my view, that displacement of the sources of moral authority. And on the other hand, I wanted to, in my speech, I have tried to explain or disentangle some of the problems try to cast some light in some of the problems of free speech that we face in our days. Basically, that was the lecture. So, I have found them extremely interesting, actually. I think the conference has been really, really illuminating in many aspects. One of the things I have enjoyed more of the conference is the broad range of perspectives. So we were together here from different fields. I'm a legal scholar. I'm a law professor interested in legal philosophy, but we have here also theologians, we have here philosophers, political philosophers. We have had the opportunity to listen also to speakers that come from the world of the private institutions, private institutes protecting religious freedom and explaining sometimes the facts more clearly, or the reports, giving reports of the situation. So that has been one of the highlights of the conference for me. Another highlight has been the warm reception we have received from the laboratory. I'm deeply grateful for the warm reception we have received, for the organization. Thank you very much, because we have enjoyed 2 wonderful days here in Tarum, and we have enjoyed a wonderful time in Shafarnia yesterday, and the wonderful treatment we have been given. And I think that would be the 2 highlights, no? So the quality of the speakers, of course. So the interdisciplinarity, the quality of the speakers, and the warmth of the organization, I would say. Thank you very much.